And I believe we're live. Hi, everyone. This is For the Love of Comics, and a very warm welcome to another Sunday live stream. I'm glad to be back after what's been a bit of an unplanned break, but here I am, and I am very excited to be back online. And I've been meaning to make a video for a while, but the editing and the putting together of all of that stuff at a technical level has been something that I've become so out of touch with that I'm going to need a little bit more time to get warmed up and back into the flow of things. For a variety of reasons, I haven't been, making these videos, and that's why I thought a live stream would be a good idea for easing back into it, but also because I've been meaning to talk about these books for quite a while, and just the fact that I've got all these videos that I want to make lined up, it's just been getting more and more delayed in some ways, and I figured I'm just going to bite the bullet, go live and talk about these books, get it off my chest, and use this as an excuse to finally connect with people after what's been a very long time. So very warm welcome, as I was saying, to everyone. Shuri Pandey, good to see you. Ashwita is here in the chat. Sleepy Reader, good to see you. Long time no see. Aris Kotsis, very good to see you. Space Monkey, hello. TA from Chicago, good to see you as well. Samrat, very nice to see you. It has been a while, yes. And I hope my audio and video is coming through all right. Let me know in the comments if there's anything wrong. I'm too warm to be wearing these headphones through the entire live stream, so I'm guessing that they're coming off pretty soon. I just wanted to make sure that this is that I'm not clipping or doing anything odd. Just, as I was saying, it's been a while, so I'm sort of unsure about everything, but Hi everyone. And yes, we've got people from Sweden, we've got Southend on Sea, UK, Finland, Europe. Great. So please, Portland, Oregon, USA. Yes, I'm glad I didn't have to say it this time, but I always say, everyone, put in the chat where you're joining from. We've got Greece, we've got the USA. And sounding good. Thank you. All right. Okay. So here goes. My headphones are coming off. If my audio does become intermittent, let me know in the comments. I have not only popped the comments out separately this time instead of having it all on one screen, but I've also enlarged the font size, sort of embracing the fact that decrepitude is catching up with me, and I'm going to need things to be adjusted, but hopefully this is going to be smooth. So good to see everyone. I've missed everyone, even people who are joining for the first time, who've never been on a live stream or catching up on the recording of one of these videos for the first time. I've missed you too. So I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to be talking about a bunch of comics, as I said, that I've been meaning to talk about for a while. And there are in some ways very different from each other, yet I believe that there's something that does bind them, or I should be able to find a connecting thread through them, I hope, which shall be the, whether I'm successful in that or not, you can let me know. I think this is going to be a fair-sized live stream. This isn't going to be a quick one, but I don't know if it's going to be one of those huge marathon sessions either. We'll see how it goes. So I'll just give people a couple more minutes to dive in while I take a look at everyone in the chat and say hello to everyone. We've got Hector from Brazil. Long time no see. Yes, indeed, it has been a long time. I've been well. I hope everyone has been well as well. I've been kind of busy, but luckily busy with comics-related things. I have obviously, as my last live stream, which was I think maybe 4 weeks ago, I talked a little bit about starting our new publishing company and publishing comics, writing my first comic and collaborating very closely with my co-author on the second chapter of it. That's taken up a lot of my time, but there's also been a number of conversations with writers and artists here in India, people who are interested in making comics and collaborating and just, publisher-oriented stuff. And Ashwita and I have been also trying to figure out distribution and sales and talking to bookstores and retail outlets, in particular small independent bookstores. But all of that is for a different live stream and for different kinds of updates. Today, I want to talk about not our comics, but other other comics that I've read. But there is a connection because part of the inspiration for us to start our own publishing company and here in India and our own comics publishing company, a big part of that inspiration was seeing the kind of comics that people were self-publishing. And so a fair section of today's live stream is going to focus on a handful and a very small representative handful of independently published Indian comics. A lot of these comics are ones that we have encountered. I mean, Indian independent comics are things that we started discovering, I think, in 2017. And then in 2018, we attended our first Indie Comics Fest. Since then, we have made it a point to attend as many of those as we can. And of course, this year, for the first time, we attended as creators and publishers on the other side of the table of this independent fest that we have become big fans of. And while we have attended the Indie Comics Fest chapter here in New Delhi, there are chapters all across India. And over the years, more and more cities have been sort of added to this roster of who host this completely volunteer-run and organized festival. And in multiple cities, there have been a number of comics that have been published that I've been able to get my hands on, even though I wasn't able to attend those Indie Comics Fests. So between these Indie Comics Fests, Comic Cons, over the years, I've been discovering more and more indie Indian comics creators, although I always feel that it's still just the tip of the iceberg and I've barely scratched the surface or any other similar cliche metaphor you want to think of. And what I'd like to talk about today has a lot to do with independent Indian comics publishing, but also indie comics publishing in general. And while we have on this channel talked a lot about what is an indie comic and what constitutes independent comics publishing, and we will continue to do so, today I think we're going to run a pretty decent gamut. Not the absolute extremes of it, but some things that I think will be quite fun and interesting. So I'm hoping that today's survey of comics is interesting to both people in India as well as outside of India. Particularly with my international viewers, I'm very often asked about Indian comics and asked to comment about or show Indian comics. And I've not always been the best equipped or the most knowledgeable about that. Over the years, I have tried to make myself a little bit more, I don't want to say authority, but give myself a little bit more chance to speak about Indian comics. But there's always been this question of when I talk about big famous comics, or at least what we consider big famous comics by big famous publishers and authors, we can speak with it, we can speak about them from a distance. But with independent comics, and particularly if you meet the creators or if you get to know the creators, something that can easily happen in such a small and burgeoning nascent scene, it becomes a very different thing. It's not exactly it's not the same thing. And so therefore speaking positively or negatively does get colored by a different light. And I don't mean this as positive. I don't mean this in a way of saying that I can't be honest, but you just approach things differently. If you know people who are writing and drawing and manufacturing and producing their own comics and putting it out there absolutely by themselves, it's very hard to judge them in the same way that you judge some big corporate publishing houses with great page rates or fantastic sales and advances. There's always going to be that kind of a difference. But I think comics are still so niche in many ways, and no one really thinks about comics in the way that we think about movies or music or video games or things like that. We don't think about people becoming multimillionaires earning. I think there is that intimacy and there is that handmade nature to most of the comics that we work with. So I think I do want to talk more about independent comics. I do want to talk more about comics that I encounter, and maybe I'll talk about them a little differently than I talk about other comics. Or maybe I won't. I don't know. I think this is something that I've been encouraged to try, and many people, not just in India, but outside of India, including my patrons and channel members and supporters, have encouraged and asked for this. And they've said, no, we want to hear what you have to say, and you should be honest, and you should give your critique honestly. So here are my tentative first steps towards that, as it were. Although they're not technically my first steps. I have talked about Indian comics and independent indie comics, comics from the Indie Comics Fest before, and much of what I talk about this channel in many ways, especially if you compare it to Marvel, DC, or even Dark Horse and Image. I now hear that it's the big four. You don't refer to the big two American comics anymore, or the manga bestsellers. Compared to that, a lot of what we talk about, a lot of what I spotlight and we hold in discussion might still be classified as niche and indie. So all of this to say that it's kind of nebulous terms anyway, so we'll sort of understand relatively what we're talking about, and we'll start with talking about a couple of books from Fantagraphics, a comics publisher that simultaneously is definitely an independent maverick publisher, but for many of us, I would think, is also one of those great big bastions. So is Fantagraphics a big famous publisher, or is it a small independent publisher? It all sort of depends on your point of view. I suppose for me and for many of us, it would be a bit of both. So today's live stream is a couple of Fantagraphics books, some lovely hardcovers from Fantagraphics, very new, which itself is kind of unusual for me, and I do have Fantagraphics to thank for that. New books from Fantagraphics, as well as independent Indian comics, and a couple of comics that kind of bridge these two, as we'll see. So before we get started, one more check at the comments. Anand Shenoy, yo, good to see you here, Anand. So speaking about creators and people we may know, Anand is the author of one or two of the books that I'm going to be talking about today. So here you have a comics creator in the chat with us while we talk about it. This shows you that for the love of comics, the channel has finally arrived. Bunkmaster B, great to see you here. Excited to hear about Indian summer and the experiment of being on the other side of the table. Yes, I mean, I'll talk probably a little less about Indian Summer Press, which is the publishing house that we have started. But I'm definitely going to be talking about making references to it, not only on this live stream, but in subsequent live streams and videos. So, and of course, in the community posts. Michael Hay says, today I chose to spend all my birthday money on graphic novels and trades at my... It's a fantastic way to spend one's birthday money. More than one or two in one visit. Yeah, I know. It's like when you have that opportunity to sort of load up, it really is intoxicating, isn't it? I mean, I've got a number of, like many of us who make YouTube videos, we have haul videos, and the ones in which we have been able to gather a number always have a certain weight to them. And of course, there are my shopping videos of the couple of times that I have when I'm visiting or traveling, what I've been able to load up with. So I completely empathize with that joy. Sleepy Reader says, the one store loaded with self-published comics one feels is encountering a different aesthetic and view of what makes good comics. Absolutely. And I think there is something about self-publishing that is simultaneously, it sometimes feels that people self-publish because they've been turned down by publishers and this is an avenue, but I don't think that it's necessarily because of that only, as in the reasons to self-publish might have more to do with a particular idiosyncratic expression, a particular viewpoint and artistic integrity or angle, which is not necessarily the most commercial, or it's the most tested, or something that a corporation or a company that's maybe not even a big corporation, what can they invest in is always going to be based on what they think they can sell. But at the same time, a publisher, and here I find myself going back and forth in dialogue with myself and with others. But a publisher's role is also to put out there what they would like to see out there, what they would like to see published and available for sale, available to buy. And that doesn't mean more of the same necessarily either. It might mean something that is different, or it might mean something that the reasons for not publishing it as a company or as a publisher may not be, and they're not often, scientific or even actually validated. They might just be following a trend or the best of our knowledge and risk mitigation and a lot of other things. So that responsibility of breaking even, of making it somehow at least financially viable in some way, as well as the responsibility of curating and putting out there wonderful, unique, individualistic things is going to be something that's a push and pull. But when judging or critiquing comics that are extremely indie versus extremely, what is the opposite of indie? I always think corporate, is the way that I go about thinking, because I think about it in financial terms and investment of money and things like that. Is that why would I be okay critiquing something that a number of people in a corporation have made versus something that one person or two people individually have made all by themselves? And sometimes I can't find a proper answer for that either. So I'm not saying that I'm right, because in comics it does seem to me to be the work of a handful of people, unlike, say, film, in which I could maybe see it as being literally hundreds and hundreds of people. And while I understand that there are sales and marketing and production-oriented things, the actual work itself could be something that is created by a single writer artist. And how can I critique a single writer artist if it is, I don't know, Jason or Jacques Tardy, to pick a couple of Fantagraphics published authors, but not when it is a self-published work that I find at a place like an Indie Comics Fest. But I think there's something about the, I mean, this is the real question, and maybe we should get into it, because even when I look at the books that I have over here, including Richard Sala, who is a favorite of mine and whose first book is being published over here, but Kayla is Precious Rubbish. Like, how does one critique these works? Because they are so unique, because they are so idiosyncratic, and they are powerful in many ways, but they're not necessarily powerful or expected in a way that you've seen before. It may have references and use vocabulary that you have seen before, but I think this is one of those questions about critique, is that are we only capable of critiquing then templatized or formulaic things, because anything that is outside of a sort of setup that we are familiar with would be impossible to critique? I don't think that's the case either. But I think this is one of those things that has always kept me from talking in very much detail about independent books and independent publishing in independent publications. However, I don't agree with that completely, even if I say that myself. I just feel uncomfortable sometimes maybe saying, if I've met somebody, and that's what it really comes down to, I think, for me, is that if I've met somebody, if I've hung out with somebody, I can honestly talk to them face to face about their work, and I can talk to them about what I think are things that I appreciate and things that I don't. But speaking about it publicly, I think that's the part that I'm really thinking about, because then you represent things as what I have said in these 10 minutes is the entire summation of what that work is. And that just feels unfair. And the thing is, with bigger things and more famous things and more widespread things, there are many more people talking about it. So whoever's listening to you can, of course, listen to you and take what you're saying as being the judgment on it, but they can also listen to other people and they can make up their own minds, or they can draw an average, or they can see the variation on it. And with smaller, independent, by the very definition, fewer people are find them available, fewer people read them, and fewer people go out and talk about them. And so therefore there is a bigger chance that what you say I'm like, it'll be 25. If there are only 4 people who've talked about it, then what you have said is 25% of the discourse. And that, I think, is the kind of pressure that I don't want, or I think that's a little unfair, where if I had something negative to say, and I come down to negative because nobody really bothers. I mean, it's not really a problem if you're saying all positive things. But if you say something negative and you're the only person who said anything about it, it's like kind of having that one review on Amazon, then that's that's the entire picture. And I think that's unfair. And I think that's closer to what worries me about smaller independent things. If there were thousands of people talking about it, I'd be just another voice, and then it would be about what my articulation is versus and in comparison to other people's. The absence of that other people makes me a little bit more concerned. Good to see you, Paolo. Sunday Comics Talk, indeed. We've got a whole bunch of people over here, but I'm going to now jump into it because it is the Sunday Comics Talk. And while I am a more relaxed and languorous conversationalist, there are a number of comics over here. So if I don't want this to be a 4 or 5 hour live stream, I better get started. But I'm glad to see everyone in the chat talking. I'm not going to be looking at the chat constantly because I get very easily distracted and lose my place. So I'm going to go through a couple of books, then come back to the chat and see if there are any questions, go through a couple of books, come back to the chat and see if there are any comments. If there's anything directly for me, at me so that it highlights on my screen. The only other thing is I would say for those of you who are here live, or for those of you who are watching the recording later and are interested in the chat, do turn on live chat from the drop-down box menu instead of top chat. Top chat is only a selection. It's not everything that is being written. I don't really know. I've never figured out why that is, but it doesn't make sense for a small channel like this to obscure some of the chat. It's not a furious, deluge of comments anyway. Sleepy Reader says, I'm balancing YouTuber concerns versus publisher concerns and versus creator concerns. Yes, absolutely. I think as a creator, I've written 24-page chapter that's been published so far, and I'm working on the second one, so I don't want to go so far as to say that I'm a creator. But yes, wanting to be a creator and wanting to be a publisher does change the dimensions, because then you wonder about the ethics of it. And, am I being churlish if I talk about somebody, who's operating in the same environment that I am in? Of course, I'm the one who's entering the environment, and I've been commenting on it beforehand would be my defense. But I think in general, in my channel, it'll be people will be hard pressed to find me speaking negatively or critiquing very vehemently any comic. And that's not that it's not because I don't have strong opinions or I don't have comics that I didn't enjoy or dislike, but I just don't make videos on them, or I don't spend a lot of time talking about them, because there are plenty that I did love and enjoy. And I've talked about this also in the past, is that I just find that to be a better use of my time. So I'm generally speaking positively. But what happens is it's almost the other way around, is that after a point of time, my channel as a YouTuber, to separate all these hats that Sleepy is identifying, as a YouTuber, my reputation, what little it is with a couple of hundred people who watch, is either I am a tender-hearted Care Bear who loves everything, and which is usually not the case, but I have had a couple of comments, and one very recently that hurt my feelings, saying that this is a really boring channel because you don't have anything negative to say, everything is just positive. And then they made some further rude comments. But that was the gist of their real critique. And I didn't find that to be a real critique because, I mean, critique doesn't mean being negative. You can critique something, and the channel is called For the Love of Comics, and I've always said that this is the channel that spotlights my favorite comics. So my reputation is one as someone who makes videos praising comics and appreciating comics or spotlighting why their favorite comics deserve to be, their favorites and things like that. So what happens over there is if I read something that I find quite good but could be improved or is not perfect, then if I don't mention that, then it might be construed that I'm as enthusiastic about that as I'm about the other ones that I also talked about. So if I find an independent comic book and I say this was great, and then someone says, well, he's made these videos about how Richard Sala is great, so this must mean that this is as great as Richard Sala. That's kind of like the flip side of it, where I don't want it to sound like everything is everything is the same just because they happen to be things that I enjoy. So my goal, hopefully, is to say what it is that I enjoyed about it. And that's the same thing with all these books today, not just the independent ones, but all these books today. I don't ever want to give the impression that just because I am talking about something and I'm spending hours talking about it, that it is perfect, because there isn't really such a thing as perfect. It's more that I have found something to appreciate within it. There might be things that other people would not enjoy as much as I did, or there might be things that other people would enjoy way more than I did. And if I am to talk about anything that I didn't enjoy, my concern is, well, that's sort of out of context, isn't it? Someone can just take that one sentence and that's all they can fixate on. And then they can say this is not a good comic because of that one thing that Anshuman, For the Love of Comics, said about it. And I don't want that to become representative. So my worry is more about, it's not that I don't have some critique or I don't have something quote unquote negative that I could say, is that I don't want it to be represented as a serious thing. It's just a thing among dozens and dozens and dozens. And if I haven't listed every single thing, then I shouldn't be listing that negative thing. And this has happened to me a lot when I make edited videos as well, is I put something in there and I say, there is this thing with it. And then when I'm editing the video, I realize that I seem to be saying all of these things and then concluding that it's all right except for this one. The negative critique has taken on almost a disproportionate weight, and it sort of colors what I'm saying as if I'm saying it's not that great, there is this problem with it. So it's the lack of being able to finesse that balance when I'm talking about things in this form, I suppose, that makes me a little wary about it, and which is another reason why for me it was really important that I talk about these, and particularly these independent comics, in a live stream, where it isn't me trying to write a script and me writing a very tight review, and it's me really sort of talking through a number of different things that I thought or that crossed my mind, and then have that be a little bit more loosey-goosey, a little bit more freeform. And I understand that live streams don't get anywhere near the views that the edited, recorded videos do, but it's still a comfortable way of talking about it, or it's something that I'm okay with later, where I'm like, yeah, I took 3 hours to talk about these 6 books and I went all over the place and it was long rambling sentences. And so therefore, whatever's mixed in there, positive or negative, is fairly balanced, better than me talking for like 3 minutes and then having one sentence in there that disproportionately is incredibly, is wrong. A bunch of comics and graphic novels mentioned on this channel. Yes, what I would love for people to do is for people to discover, which is always the thing that I'm happiest about hearing, is discover books to check out or to sort of make that final leap, because very often people will be like, oh, that's been on my list for a while, or, that's been in my shopping cart for a while, or even that's been on my shelves for a while and I've never gotten to it. And you've given me that final push. Or there are, of course, I didn't know this existed, or I wasn't aware this was there. That's what I really want, is for people to check things out and make their own minds up about stuff, but also to provide a look, because comics are expensive and they're not easy to buy in bulk, irrespective of, every now and then you might have some birthday money. But the idea is that people can take a look and say, that looks like something, or that sounds like something I'd like to check out, or maybe not for me, just so that they've got that. So it's more about that sort of information. But of course, primarily it is about things that I have enjoyed, and talking about things that I've enjoyed. So, enough caveats and disclaimers, although honestly, there is no such thing as enough. First up over here, we're going to talk about a couple of books published by Fantagraphics, the terrific Seattle-based publisher that really requires no introduction to followers of this channel. But the two books that are brand new Fantagraphics publications are Kayla E's Precious Rubbish. And over here, I'll have to worry a little bit about my focus on this new lens. Sorry about that. And Richard Sala's Night Drive, which, for a Richard Sala fan, it's a posthumously published work, is a terrific thing that I didn't think that I was going to be seeing. But Night Drive is something that I was aware of. Precious Rubbish is not something I was aware of until I saw Fantagraphics some months ago post about it. And this is the debut work of Kayla E. Although the pieces within it, the short pieces within this book, have been published in different forms, as is often the case in other publications. And then there are, I think, original pages or pages being published here for the first time. This is a powerful autobiographical work, which is incredibly designed and illustrated in a way that was quite remarkably surprising to me. So if you, I mean, I think right at the beginning you can see the sort of there we go, the color scheme and the illustrative style over here is using these colors in a very catching and striking way. The artwork, but most of all the sort of tone in which these stories are told, is very purposefully reminiscent of older comics, in particular comics like Nancy or Little Lulu, John Stanley's work in dealing with some incredibly difficult topics. And being autobiographical, the potency of this is even more, because you realize that this is someone telling the story of their childhood and their family, and that distance between a fictional character, no matter how powerful the story is, and an autobiography, the difference in the distance, I think, is something that we'll understand quite clearly. So when I read this, some of the things that I'm reminded of are obviously, and when it comes to the design and the nature of the way the story is told, in different pieces, some of them as gag comics, some of them as Sunday funnies, some of them as little biographical pieces, but also things like the dress-up dolls and the cutouts. It's very reminiscent of things that Chris Ware and Seth have done, among many others, Ivan Brunetti. But these individual pieces and their collage-like effect come together to tell the story of the author's childhood. And this story, so right here at the beginning, you've got this word search, and the words that you can search for will essentially be giving you a, I wouldn't say a content warning, but a summation of things that are covered in that this autobiography is about: abuse, alcoholism, arthritis Atkins, borderline, codeine, crucifixion, depression, disembodiment, disassociation, divorce, dyke, exorcism, fundamentalism, poverty, prick, trauma, vodka, stress, trailer park, incest, sexual abuse. This is definitely a story about abuse. There are many aspects to it, and the manner in which it's presented can change in its style, from piece to piece, from story to story. And it's difficult to describe the cumulative effect of these pieces, as dark as it is and as difficult as the subject matter is. There's something about the style and the confidence in the presentation, in the embracing of this style, to tell these horrific stories, that it goes beyond what I've seen before. It's not simply about therapy, although it does have certain aspects like that. It's about being able to deal with this and being able to tell these stories in a way that reminded me of a couple of books that we've talked about on this channel before, but in in a very different style. So, for example, the Una's Becoming Unbecoming and Emily Carrington's Our Little Secret are two autobiographical works that deal with family and sexual abuse and childhood abuse. And they are both in very different styles. One in an almost abstract, impressionistic art collage form, another in a much more down to earth, slice of life, realistic depiction. And this is now another approach that I found to be. There's this something about this cartoonish approach that makes the violence and the cruelty and the horror both a little bit more palatable, because you are seeing it cartoonishly presented, but also more powerful. Also, it hits harder because of that juxtaposition or that irony or that way of presenting it as a little Lulu comic, as a Sunday Funnies one-page gag comic. But it's it's not at all the same thing, but it's similar in effect to the movie Natural Born Killers. Has this sequence which is set as if it's a sitcom with a laugh track, the three camera I Love Lucy type of Married with Children type of sitcom. But the things they're talking about in that sitcom are horrible, and the violence that is being depicted, even verbally, is terrible, but accompanied by this laugh track and accompanied by the cinematography and camera angles. And in many ways, this work seems like a more extended, a more ambitious, and a more complex story in that kind of style. I don't know that as a as a reader of comics who's not necessarily, and this is something I say when I talk about the comics of Chris Ware as well, I'm not as familiar with the things of design, with the vocabulary of design, but it is something that would work whether or not you have the vocabulary for it. So I think the effect created by the way this is put together with the colors and the text, it's just, to me, perfectly balanced, because it could easily have been overheated or too detached. It could have so easily gone awry by being too full of itself, I would say, in some ways, but it doesn't. And the fact that it manages to not only avoid that, but to sort of get more and more, to build more and more power as it goes through, adding more dimension to the story of this childhood and this later life, and the effect of that childhood on it, I thought was terrific. This is not an easy book to read, but it's easier, if that makes sense, than I expected it to be. Given the subject matter and given what it's about, it feels like it feels like a work that uses comics to try to make sense, or try to unpack, or try to at least tell the story of what happened in a way that I haven't seen before, and that I think is fantastically successful. So not not the lightest read, but a shocking, surprising, and quite elegant book. I think that I ended up being sort of hypnotized by. So this has, with a fair warning about the kind of the kind of subject matter that it is, I think this has my highest recommendation. And also, I did note that this in the copyright page, that this book is designed by the writer artist Kayla E. So this is as I was saying, it's a wonderfully designed work, and the production is fantastic as well, and it's very, very integral to the way it reads. So superb job all around. All right. Looking through the comments. Good evening, Arindam. Good to see you. Sunflower, Michael Hay. Sunflower says you're from Illinois. Yes, Oak Park is where I had my. I don't know if you've seen my Illinois, Chicago videos about visiting various bookstores. I made some many years ago, and then I made some last year. So in case you haven't, after this live stream, of course, don't go anywhere right now. But if you haven't, do check out. I think there might even be a playlist on my channel called Bookstore Hopping in Chicago and in Oak Park, which is a place that I try to get to as often as I can. Aris says this style we have connected to children's cartoons lets our defenses down. Yes, that's a very good way to put it. I think it's a way of getting past our defenses, but it's also a way of sort of fooling our defenses, where we're not only more ready to receive this, but as we are receiving it and as we are seeing how ugly things are, it's not creating an outright revulsion. It's not creating, as horrible as it is. What we want to see is the artistry with which the story is being told, the elegance with which it's being carried out. So there's this quite an interesting effect over here, but it would have been just a gimmick if it didn't succeed in the way that it does. And so for me, it's not just a question of, which is where maybe the Natural Born Killers example isn't the best one. Maybe that's limited in its depiction. It's a joke that only has got one note to it, or it makes its point, and then that's the point. This one, I think, isn't just that. It isn't just, here's this kind of story in this kind of style. It's every single incident and every single situation that's being talked about is being amplified and measured in many ways. And that's where the various styles and the various approaches in those pieces come into play. All right. Good evening and good night. Noah Van Skyver just did an interview with the creator of Precious Rubbish on his channel. Yes, I believe I watched that. I watched half of it, actually, and then halfway through it, and I was really enjoying that discussion. I was like, oh, I don't know if I want this to interfere with what I'm going to say in my live stream, so I'm going to have to go back and watch the rest of it. But Noah Van Skyver, of course, has a terrific channel with terrific conversations, and I would highly recommend them to anyone. Greetings. I'm doing well. Next up, also from Fantagraphics, is Night Drive by Richard Sala, the one, the only, the late great Richard Sala, one of my absolute favorite comics artists of all time. Someone I've talked about on numerous occasions, and I talked about him on numerous occasions before he passed away, saying, "Oh, I can't believe people haven't heard of Richard Sala, but I can completely believe it that he's not more because he's so idiosyncratic." But I would joke a long time ago that when I was making my shelf videos, so I had like these 14, 15 videos that were a tour of my comics library, and every shelf had a couple of Richard Sala books because I didn't have them all by author and I had them by size and things like that. And Night Drive is actually Richard Sala's very first book. It was a 32 page, I believe, or 28-page comic, an anthology of short stories, most of them one page, maximum 2 pages long. Well, I mean, there's one longer story, but it was published. He self-published it. He self-published 500 copies, and it was never reprinted ever again. And it's one of those things. It's kind of like the first issue of Albedo with Usagi. Uh, it's like one of those legendary things that is out there and that's all there was. Oh, or like the first issue of Loved Rockets, the self-published black and white one. So Night Drive has for me been like that, and now Fantagraphics has brought out this handsome, beautifully produced hardcover reprinting that, and this is obviously a lot bigger. It's a lot thicker than 28 pages because it has within it some wonderful write ups and illustrations. So you've got a Remembrance by Dana Mary Andra, which is a beautiful, beautiful piece. I loved reading this as a Richard Sala fan and fanatic, but also I can see the love and the friendship that the author of this Remembrance had with Sala, and him talking about Sala over here also works as a lovely introduction. I do think that the the passing of Richard Sala was it's something that I'm still quite sad about, and it's because I wanted more of his work. And while this isn't a new work, it's also it's also bizarre because having now read almost everything of Sala's that I have been able to get my hands on, including some old drawn and quarterly magazines, this is this is even older than those. So I feel like I've seen Richard Sala evolve. I've seen him go from those scratchy black and white comics to the lush painted ones while keeping similarities, while keeping some things the same, evolving other things, evolving his storytelling style. And this is so far back that this is before any of the things that I've seen. And you can see it in the art, you can see it in the writing, and you can see it in the page design. All of these individual pieces, they feel familiar. They feel familiar, particularly if you have seen his if you've seen his other work, even his particularly his black and white early work, but completely different at the same time. And this is like one of those things. It's like it's hard for me to judge this on behalf of anyone else because to me it's fantastic. To me it's fascinating. And as a book, and I said this about Poison Flowers and Pandemonium, and I also said this about the new edition of The Chuckling What's It, both books that were posthumously published by Fantagraphics, both Richard Sala works that were published by Fantagraphics. I said them like these are wonderful memorials to Richard Sala. These are fantastic editions, wonderfully produced, and would be lovely on any shelf, but as remembrances. This is quite literally the best remembrance. This is the first work being gone back to and looked back with such love and such passion, and then you get this work that hasn't seen the light of day for over 40 years, and then you have some extras. So you've got this. So here is the back cover. It was a two-color cover. So that's the back cover, and this is the front cover of Night Drive. So that's the whole work in there, and everything else is extras. So there are two introductory pieces. One is an interview, and one is the remembrance that I mentioned, and one is Richard Sala in his own words about the adaptation of one of the stories, probably the most famous story, because as I said, this was never reprinted. The way that the Invisible Hand story is known is because it was adapted for MTV's Liquid Television in the early 90s. I have seen that. I didn't watch it in the early 90s, but it is available on YouTube if you want to see it. But people who had MTV in the early or mid 90s may remember Liquid Television and may even remember Invisible Hands. There are people who I'm sure have fond memories of Invisible Hands without knowing anything about Richard Sala or knowing that it was him. There is a little line in the introductory piece saying that should have been the first of his adaptations, not the first and only. And yeah, his comics are brilliant, but even by those standards, this is very unusual. And one of the unusual things is this is Richard Sala not quite in comics. Even the advertising language he uses, and that's pointed out over here, says comic style storytelling. This is him really more halfway between comics and the graphic design or gallery art world. And I think there's something quite intriguing. And I have to say, and I'll be honest over here, is I've always just been interested in comics. I've not been that interested in the gallery art world, and I'm not that interested in the very highbrow, and this is me probably being defensive in my vocabulary, the very highbrow approach to not quite comics, but something that we learn from comics, or something that I'd like to borrow from comics, but really do. It's kind of the stuff between genre fiction and literature, etc. It's that kind of thing that bugs me about it. But it is interesting to me to see how he evolved even from this to his earlier work, how much more he embraced comics and how much more he got into not just the colors, but the way the panels move and the sequence. Things over here can be quite, not just non sequitur-ish, but quite bizarre in the best way, obviously. But again, very different, very, very different while being familiar. However, the other piece in this is the final, the sort of afterword by Daniel Klaus. And the afterword by Daniel Klaus mentions that Richard Sala sold almost all his art. And longtime viewers will know that I had the good fortune of communicating with him on his website, and even got to buy a piece from him directly. And he sold all his art, and he said that whenever I'm trying to find the line. In the sad process, this is Daniel Klaus, in the sad process of going through Richard's belongings after he died, I was struck by how unsentimental he had been about most of his art. He'd sold virtually every single page he'd done in the last 30 plus years of his career. Everything must go, he'd always say when a tax bill or a rent check came due, including work that I knew had a great personal meaning to him. So he got rid of almost everything. However, aside from 2 pages, he still had every single piece of art from Night Drive hidden away in his closet. So either it held great importance for him, as it does for the fortunate few who own one of the 500 all signed copies scattered around the world, or he wanted to make sure it never again saw the light of day. Well, if that was the case, then Mr. Daniel Klaus and Fantagraphics have not respected his wishes at all. But that's great news for someone like me in this fantastic edition. And this edition is designed, if this afterward page didn't, is designed by Daniel Klaus, which is why it's got that sort of Monica type of feel to it. So looking at the designer for these books is now my latest hobby. So designed by Daniel Klaus, Night Drive by Richard Sala. I'll also note over here one thing, just publishers Gary Groth and Eric Reynolds, special thanks to, and there are a number of people over here who are being thanked. Terry Doyle and the estate of Richard Sala for providing the original art, and the original art, as Dan Klaus said, was in his thing, as well as to Dries de Wolf, Lars Tegberg, and Steve Kriger for providing scans of the Night Drive outtakes. So these outtakes over here are things that he sold. But Dries de Wolf is someone I have talked to and is a viewer of this channel. He and I have bonded over our love for Richard Sala, and he has mentioned to me that he has Richard Sala art that he bought from Richard Sala. But it seems that he had some outtake pages produced over here in different paper stock than the rest of the book. And he and other people named over here, whose names I have absolutely butchered, provided scans of these for the creation of this. So that's a thing that I just loved as well, is that a fellow fan, reader, someone who watches this tiny little channel had artwork that could be scanned and be put together in this, and now I can see it as well. So just a wonderful book, again, magnificently produced, wonderfully designed by the incomparable Richard Sala, his very first work, Night Drive, back in print. Let's see, what else? Do we have any comments, or should I just keep going? At what age did I start loving comic books? Oh, I think 4, 5. Whenever I got my first comic book, I think I was hooked from the very beginning. All right, I've got some good recommendations over here. Thank you very much. All right, moving along. Now, these were the two Fantagraphics hardcovers. And I want to thank Fantagraphics for sending me these because, that's what I forgot to mention. Precious Rubbish is out right now. So it's brand new in the way that I think it came out on the 4th or the 5th of April. So this is out right now. And Night Drive is, I think, due to be out on the 4th or the 5th of May. So this is going to be available. It's up for pre-order, I'm sure, etc. very soon. And Fantagraphics sent me these books, and I got them weeks ago. And this is one of the things that I've been very lax about making videos. No one's ever going to send me books ever again, but I knew I was going to talk about these books, especially once I'd read Precious Rubbish. But as it turns out, I'm kind of happy that I waited because now they are available and now people can go out and get them if they're interested. I didn't want to talk about them when people would not have them be available. So we'll just say that was my plan all along. I've reignited your interest in comics. Well, that is a great compliment. But now, also from Fantagraphics is Bhanu Pratap's Cutting Season, and Bhanu Pratap is a comics writer and artist based out of India. And I have to say, ashamedly, that I wasn't aware of him or his work until very, very recently. Knowing that Fantagraphics has introduced me to so many writers and artists, creators, comics creators, and here is an Indian writer artist being published for. There is a joke, or I don't know if it's a joke. It's a sort of sardonic commentary that we hear a lot in India. Is that you don't appreciate or know even sometimes artists or creative forces in India until someone outside of India appreciates them or brings attention to them. And this has been the case, a number of instances when it comes to film, when it comes to music, when it comes to theater, cultural arts, etc. And comics also apparently seem that way. Now, of course, I will do my best to keep myself abreast, but there are lots of comics. So, but I do feel a sort of, I don't know how to put this properly, is like, I do feel a sort of pride in which it's not nationalistic pride or something like that, but it's just like, I wasn't aware. And when I heard that there is a book by Fantagraphics that's published someone, I was very curious about it. I wanted to read it. And luckily, I was lent this copy and I now need to get myself my own copy. So I was very happy to get this. This is published by Fantagraphics Underground. So for those of you who are wondering what Fantagraphics Underground is, I had the good fortune to meet Bhanu, and he was like, "Yeah, that's the stuff that Fantagraphics feels is too out there or is too, avant-garde." So this is definitely that an avant-garde comic, if you will. So there you have Bhanu Pratap creating comics being published by Fantagraphics that are so avant-garde that Fantagraphics has to put them into the underground to the underground imprint. I see very quickly over here that Comic Crack says, "Dear Mother and Other Stories from Strangers Publishing is well worth hunting down." So thank you, Comic Crack. You are my man in Havana when it comes to the underground, the indie North American things. You've read more Bhanu Pratap than I have. Cutting Season is the first and only book. I can see that Dear Mother and Other Stories is the one that I need to look up. I think the couple of things that immediately struck me are the strong sense of composition design, the colors, which are fantastic and really wonderfully reproduced on this very matte-ish paper. And you can tell that usually when I hold a book up over here, you'll see a little bit of the light shining back at you, whereas this is just it's lovely and slightly rough, but not at all newsprint or cheap feeling. It's very deluxe feeling actually. But the main thing is the way it reproduces these colors. And so you've got the design composition, you've got the colors, and then you've got the anatomy, the way the human body is represented. And these stories, it's a collection of short stories. They're all abstract and non sequitur in some ways, but at the same time, there's definitely a sense of narrative pushing you, but that narrative isn't necessarily the most traditional narrative. A lot of this is about the way you're looking at all of these panels together, and then the kind of the kind of storytelling that you are creating in your head. Obviously, that's the case for every comic. Now that makes it sound really. You know what? I'll just show you, and you can put into words what it is that we are getting from. I hope the focus is. There we go. This is a collection of, I think, about 15 or 16 pieces, as Comic Crack is saying, Dear Mother and Other Stories is also a collection of shorter pieces. And this is published, as I said, by Fantagraphics. But when I look at the copyright page, I see that the design is by Kayla E, the author and designer of Precious Rubbish. So here's Fantagraphics connections over here throughout. Look at this. And these stories, a lot of them feel like stories about relationships, and they feel like stories in either the aftermath or the sort of peak crescendo of relationships, often with acts of violence. But unlike the more cartoonishly depicted real violence, this is more like cartoonish violence that is represented metaphorically. No, Bhanu Pratap Anurag is not British. He is an Indian and a resident of India. And Cutting Season from Fantagraphics is his collection of short stories that once again, from Fantagraphics Underground, where I will not be able to tell you in every story this is what happens beginning to end, because I don't think that's the point of these stories. I think the moments that these panels are trying to capture, I think more than anything else, it's about that sort of simultaneous presentation, and then you make of it that sort of that effect that you get from that you draw from this. These are, I think, difficult books in some ways to talk about, although I'm sure that there are many competent reviewers who would. But sometimes when I would read work like this in the past, I would worry a lot that I'm not getting it. Like I didn't get it. I am not able to decode it, that there must be an actual solution out there and it means this one thing. And I think it's that frustration that prevents me or prevented me from trying out more of those works. And I think a lot of this has to do with just exposing yourself to more and more works. And there'll be plenty of things where there'll be this a much more strong narrative through line, but it will have a similar sort of non sequitur, or I'm a little rudderless, or I'm a little worried that I'm not sure what's going on. And whether it's stuff like I'm trying to think about like Jim Woodring's Frank stories, or even the Mega Hex stories with Meg Morgan Owl. There's one big example that I seem to maybe Archer Pruitt's, Soft Boy. It's like I'm not really sure, but there's more form in it, or at least there's sequence. There's something that I can attach myself to as far as like comics that I know how to read, and it's similar enough, but it's not giving me the same kind of story. It's not giving me the same kind, but it's giving me a different effect. I think reading those kind of things have helped me try to read other things. Now, I don't know if that's what I would automatically reach for when I feel like reading something new, but I do think that over the years I've softened a little bit when it comes to books like this. Now, once again, I may not find it very easy to critique or talk about. And then I might wonder, like, well, now that I've met the person, can I truly say that I don't get it? Because won't he think that I'm foolish? It's like these kind of things happen. But actually, what happens when I read this is that I'm more intrigued and interested in my reading of it. And I think that is an interesting experience where that once you abandon that concern of have I decoded it or have I understood it, and you start thinking more about how you read it or how it makes you feel and why it makes you feel a particular way without worrying about how it would make someone else feel, I think that's when it opens up and becomes a different kind of thing. So I would, like all of these comics, all three of these actually, in many ways are not traditional comics, but I think that's the whole point, is that what is a traditional comic? The more we read, the less we are able to sort of pinpoint. And I think what I appreciate about the way that these have been put together, the composition, the design, the production, not just the writing and the art, although of course it's the writing and the art first and foremost, is terrific. It's an experience, and it's taken with such seriousness that I really appreciate it. Comic Crack says, "Do you know him well enough to do an interview?" I don't know about that, but I think I could definitely try to get a conversation. Although I'd probably need some help in figuring out how to sound smart. So maybe I'll take some tips from you, Comic Crack. But I'm sure that he would love to know and love to hear the kind of points that you're. Whether you're up for some interview questions of your own. Ashwita says she avoids experimental copies. Yeah, comics. Yeah, and this is the thing with experimental anything. I think experimental music, experimental movies. This is experimental fiction. If you're trying to read Finnegan's Wake, and that was written a long time ago. So. There is, but is there no room for experimentation for people who read a particular thing only? I don't know. I don't know if all readers should be divided into, here are the readers who read standard stuff, whatever we may mean by standard, and here are readers who read, and never the twain shall meet. I don't know about that. I think when I read comics like this, they challenge me in some ways, but I don't mean challenge. I shouldn't, I think, mean challenge like to challenge you to solve the puzzle or to find the right answer. It's more that I can tell that a lot of thought and a lot of care has gone into something. And I think that at some point of time, when we talk about a well made film or when we talk about something we really admire the care that has gone into it. And conversely, we can think about certain things as lazy or certain things as condescending because they haven't taken enough care. They've taken shortcuts or they've indulged in cliche. They've asked for pre existing knowledge and pre existing biases to do the heavy lifting. And that is less impressive and that is more of a waste and that feels more like white noise or disposable throwaway junk stuff because it doesn't have substance to it because of the lack of care. So I think for me, once I recognize that that's what I'm really responding to, it's not like I love the animated movie The Iron Giant, which is an extremely popular and I don't love it just because it's about a boy and a robot. I love it because it's very well made. So I am responding to the care. So if I respond to the care in something that is traditional, I can respond to the care in something that is non-traditional. As if I can see it and if I can recognize it, then I will respond to it. So I think difficult reading starts to feel masochistic or no pain, no gain. Yeah, I think if it's causing you pain, yeah, this is something to think about. But then again, I hear from people who undertake physical exercise. Say they go to a place like a gym or something and they do things called workouts or they exercise every day. There are people who love the burn. They love the burn. They feel sick if they're not actually exerting themselves, etc. And these are things that to a certain extent I think can operate at other levels also. I think we know that we've gotten to this point where everyone is talking about second screen viewing and how short our attention spans are, so on and so forth. And that's one of the big reasons why I often have doubts about YouTube and social media and what am I even doing and who cares about it's like, well, no, you just do your thing. And if you can't do short form funny interesting hook you for 30 seconds at a time stuff, just do your own thing and hopefully there'll be a small group of people who'll be all right, just listening to people ramble about comics for 2 hours with nary an edit in sight. So it's along the same lines. Is I think certain things are not difficult per se. They just become relatively difficult compared to all the other easy stuff there is out there. And then there is the other stuff, which is art, which is like art to a certain extent is always a little difficult. I mean, that's kind of the whole point of art is, but it's art. It's not, I think, I don't know who it was. I don't know if it is, I might get this quote wrong and I don't know who said it. Maybe it was Goethe who said, art is not difficult because it wants to be difficult. It's difficult because it wants to be art. Or maybe it wasn't Goethe, or maybe no one said it, or maybe that's silly. But that's kind of in the line, I think, along those things. Comics fan, microphone, yes. This microphone it's not a new microphone, but I don't know if people have seen it before. If you saw a video last year in which I was on near mint condition, in a big panel discussion about what books we would want in a library. I think this microphone might have appeared in that one. All right, moving along. So we've got 3 hardcover Fantagraphics books, 2 of them brand new, 1 of them relatively new. Bhanu Pratap's Cutting Season, Indian independent comic from Fantagraphics, designed by the author of Precious Rubbish, which brings us to these Indian independent comics that I would love to talk about. And I just want to point out that I've read over, I think, the last 6 or 8 months, I've read a number of Indian comics just because I've been making myself familiar with what's out there and seeing what publishers are putting out, what people are putting. So this is just a small selection of that. And this is not to say that the other books are not books that I enjoyed. This is just kind of like me drawing a through line. As I said, I do want to think about what independent comics are. I am focusing here on self-published comics, where there are comics that are published by companies like Penguin Random House and Hachette and HarperCollins, and it seems odd to call them independent in some ways because they are published by big corporate entities. But at the same time, I know that their writers and artists are independent. They're not full-time artists, but they get a royalty, but it's creator-owned. It's not an IP for a superhero farm, trying to make a Netflix show and stuff like that either. But over here, I'm focusing on self-published comics. And first up is Stories from Zoo by Anand. Anand is Anand Shenoy, who was in the chat just earlier. He might have fallen asleep by now. And I heard about Zoo, and here's another shameful thing where I hadn't actually picked up or read any issues of Zoo, the collection Stories from Zoo, published here by Bubbles, the American company, again, that brings out the Bubbles zine. Brian, I think, is the owner of Bubbles. This is a collection of stories extracted from Zoo issues 1, 2, and 3. Zoo being a self-published periodical, I would say, like Adrian Tumina's Optic Nerve or Seth's Palookaville by Anand. I keep wanting to say Anand Shenoy or Anand Pagal Kutta as he's known on Instagram, but these books say Anand, so I'm just going to say Anand over here. But there are now a couple of different Anands. Now this is how Bubbles has reprinted Zoo, but this is, as I said, Zoo 1, 2, and 3, and this is Zoo issue 4, and this is how it is self-published here in India. Whoops, let me. So this is, I'm not sure if the earlier issues were the same size or Stories from Zoo is a slightly larger size, but from what I understand and from what Anand has told me, this is a lot of what is there in issues 1, 2, and 3. There might be other things in issues 1, 2, and 3 that are not collected in over here. But over here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stories in about 108 pages. And this is a book, like these other books, that is available in the United States. In fact, last year, when I was visiting and I was making those videos in and around Chicago and Oak Park, I saw Stories from Zoo in Quimby's. And that's where I was like, oh my God, I've been hearing about this and it's so incredible to see this. And the funny thing was that, again, as I said, I have had the good fortune of meeting people. So I met Anand after I got back. And it was, for those of you who've been following this channel and our community posts on Instagram, it was when Joe Sacco had come to India. So I met Anand at the Joe Sacco signing, and he gave me a copy of his book. And I was talking to him about how I had seen this at Quimby's just the week before, or like 5 days before that, and it was something that I was looking forward to. It was like something I was looking forward to getting, hopefully in the original issues format. But now I have this collection of short stories, which is, I'm just giving you a glimpse of the art and lettering style, which has this extreme handmade quality, but is, in my opinion, and I'm not just saying this because I've encountered the gentleman now, are terrific short stories. They're very funny, but they're also quite poignant. The expressiveness in them is just pure comics. When I look at the sort of the the way that the way the silences are used, when there isn't, say, spoken text in there, and the moment to moment movement, the way that the characters faces move, is not, again, the most traditionally how would you put this, not the most traditionally styled, but at the same time extremely familiar as far as comic storytelling is concerned. I think Anand has a real sense of pacing and the sense of humor being put across, while at the same time creating, particularly, I'm trying to find one very good example of the expressions on the faces of these characters. They take on the meaning that they need to with the story, not because you know what this expression means from before, but the way that it appears at the moment in the story, whether it's with text or not, seems to me to be making that moment in a way that is just totally confident comics making. So I think, when if you were to open, and I'm speaking very basically over here. If you were to open one of these comics and turn to a page like this, your first glance might be like, oh, this looks really odd, or it looks really indie, or it looks really edgy. And then when you start reading it, it flows so easily and it flows so smoothly, and you are never, not one moment, are you confused as to what the characters are feeling and what kind of a situation they're in. That's what I think of terrific comics abilities. Now, when you have moments or pages like this, which is just narrative blocks, I've read dozens and dozens of comics that attempt to do things like this that feel extremely stodgy and feel extremely sort of fossilized and held in place, and it doesn't seem to flow. And that's the best thing that I can say about it, that even with all of this text, even with the caption boxes being rectangles, and with the handwriting style of lettering looking the way it does, it at no point of time is the flow interrupted or slowed or sped up in a way that is not being manipulated by the author. And that is something that I found to be absolutely masterful. Most of these stories that are there in the Stories from Zoo collection, as well as Zoo number 4, which itself is a sort of not just an anthology, but it's a different kind of collection, where all of the pieces in number 4 were originally, or almost all the pieces in number 4 were originally published in other magazines and journals, and are being collected over here together under Anand's name for the first time. And all of these stories, or I think I would say most of these stories, are some form of speculative fiction, while not outright sci-fi or outright fantasy in the way that we broadly think about it. There's always a little bit of weirdness, but whether this weirdness is acknowledged by the characters as being weird or as a regular part of their life differs from story to story. There isn't really a pattern to them across the stories, but each individual story has its own um, its own vocabulary. But what I find perhaps the most impressive is the writing, as I was saying, the flow of the writing, because there is there are stories that feel to me like perfect little short stories in the way that literary fiction, like the stories of Raymond Carver or even the stories of Isaac Asimov. It doesn't have to be only highbrow stuff, but there is a feel, and I think I talked about this when I was talking about the short stories of Chris Gooch, who's Under Earth and more recently in Utero, I've talked about. But the short stories that were there in Deep Breaths, they had this like slight speculative part of them and slight creepy. There are stories that I think over here that might be classified as horror stories in some ways, but the dread that they have is a very different kind of dread than, say, just a straight up body horror story or something like that. The moments that we see over here are quite recognizable, even when they're looking at very odd things. And the thing that I enjoy about short stories that I don't necessarily see being done adeptly always, I think in almost every single story in this collection as well as this, I had no complaints. It was once again, it was the short story is a real is an art form that I think a lot of people gravitate towards too as writers, because it's easier to finish, obviously, but also because you can do something and put it down there and not have to worry about the larger consequences of it. But that also, I think, leaves many short stories, especially by amateur writers, feeling a little incomplete or rushed or half baked, just in the nature of that itself. This is, in my opinion, the stories from Zoo by Anand all feel fully baked and complete and very purposeful, very adroitly done, and extremely satisfying. When you finish the story, you're like, yeah, I read a story. That was a complete story in itself. There's no more that I want to know about it. I mean, like, there's always something, but it's like, like when people want to read more, when they're want like when they're reading novels and they wish there were more novels in a series, and they want a series, or they want another season of a TV show, or they want sequels to movies. I get it, but sometimes I feel like, why? Sometimes stories should just end. Sometimes stories should just be snapshots, and that's really where their beauty and their power comes in. And I think these are perfect examples of things like that, where they have beginning, middle, and end, and they may not be the most traditional ones, but they feel complete, in a way that I would say that's the only real tradition you need. You need to feel like you read something that was a complete story and it affected you in a particular way because the author wanted to manipulate you into feeling that way, and they paced it and they pieced it out and they presented it in just that way, which is what I think these do. So once again, highly recommended stories from Zoo, published by Bubbles, and Zoo number 4. And I think if you get in touch with Anand, maybe you can ask him if you can get Zoo 1, 2, or 3, whether they're being reprinted or not. They are, as I said, they're all self-published and brought out by someone heading over to a printer themselves. So he might do that. Hi, Jacob. Good to see you. Sleepy Reader says short stories have their own aesthetic, different from longer forms that make them tricky to do well. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think this idea of short stories is aesthetic. Even then, it's not just one aesthetic. The short stories of Nabokov, Dostoevsky would be very different from the stories of, I don't know, like Donald Barthelme in some ways. But the fact is that because that's limited and because it's constrained, you've got to finish. You've got to do it all in that period, and that's all you've got. And at the same time, you don't have the ability to relax and take your time. But if you did relax and take your time, you wouldn't write a very good short story. I mean, like there's like a weird thing. Like I think it's true that there is an aesthetic, but there are several aesthetics in many ways. What I like about the short story is it doesn't have to be involved in something more, and therefore it can put everything down on the paper and say this is all there is. And of course, it's not like if there is a character in a short story, and if the short story is not going from birth to death, you know that there is more outside of that story, but at the same time there isn't. That short story is all there is. And so the fact that it is simultaneously indicative of a larger world and more stuff out there, but also insistent that that's all there is. I think that is a curious friction. And where with novels, I think you could say that, oh, I could do the same thing with a novel. But with novels, and especially with these large, sprawling novels, it is like you could always have another novel, and you could always have a spin off novel, and you can have a sequel. And I know you could kind of do that in stories as well. The Sherlock Holmes stories, I guess, are a good example of that, where they're all self contained, but you can create a larger universe and characters, etc. with that. But the comics short stories in these collections, like the other ones that I've mentioned before, are a great pleasure to read because they are so different from the kind of longer form works that we usually read. And generally, I think also, this is my finding, is that often when people write short stories in comics form, um, it feels like it should have been a little longer. So it's always difficult to make those 6 pages or those 9 pages or those 4 pages feel like the perfect length. You understand that that's how long it is and that's how long they decided to make it, but I often feel that there should have been more, or there was something that was missing, or something that was not quite completely calibrated. So the way that I identify a perfect short story is when you go, that was just the perfect length. I didn't want any more, or I didn't want it to be shorter. Of course, there is no actual formula. There can be a great short story in 6 pages, and there can be a great short story in 35 pages. The pacing and the flow of it is what really matters. So when you can convince me that that's the only length it could possibly have been, that's when I know that you've done a fantastic job. Um, all right, just quickly looking at the comments. No, Sleepy Reader. I don't think you were misusing the word aesthetic, but I mean, there is an aesthetic quality to having that finished story. All right. So after Anand, I have over here Shampoo and Daddy. There we go. Can we? A small little booklet, also a collection of shorter pieces that were, I think, Aditi has been putting these short pieces out on her Patreon, if I'm not mistaken, and then decided to put them all into a collection. These are short stories about the two title characters, Shampoo and Daddy. And this is the art style and the colors and the lettering, which are to me instantly evocative and terrific reading. Like on, oh, look at that one panel, look at that next panel. But what I was really surprised by and really charmingly surprised by was how beautifully they read and how smoothly. Again, I think one of the key things behind all of the things that we're talking about today is no matter how abstract or how non sequitur or how avant-garde or how experimental they are, it's a question of flow. It's a question of, do I want to keep reading, but also am I being interrupted in my reading? Is something blocking me from going, or can I go from one panel to another, from one page to another? I think that's the larger or the most simpler kind of distinguishing thing I'm making. And over here, this rabbit called Shampoo and this pig called Daddy. And the pig is called Daddy because uh, they were named, like over here, my mother named me after her father. That's the initial joke. And over here I was like, okay, so this is going to be a little funny, silly sort of comic. And it is funny and silly in some ways, but it's also incredibly awkward and touching, and at moments heartbreaking, but never without losing its silliness. And why this surprised me, and why this pleasantly surprised me, as I was saying, is that as I read this, I got a distinct sense of not just these two characters, but also the kind of world they live in and the kind of situations they deal with. There's nothing that's mind-blowingly there's sci-fi or fantasy. This is not, as I was talking about Jim Woodring's Frank, for example. It's not like that. It's not this bizarre world with bizarre rules. It's sometimes extremely simple, extremely relatable, everyday things, but then presented in ways like, here's a character splitting themselves in half so that one half can go away and do other things. And it's a very funny comic, but it's also in many ways quite serious, without ever becoming self-important and leaden. It's another one of those terrifically designed. This is designed by the writer as an object. Even this edition is beautifully designed, and it's got a lot of clever little things in it. But it, at all points, as I was showing you, at all points is very evocative, is very fun to look at. And the colors and the color schemes, or the color palette over here, is some of the most beautiful I've seen in small press, independent publishing, especially in especially out of the comics. Focus again. There we go. And then there's one thing over here where this character, who's a bit of a pyromaniac, and then you've got, including this, which is burned pages. This is something that the author herself burns. And this, she was at Comic Con, oh sorry, Indie Comics Fest, and then would burn copies at the table, or maybe she started pre-burning them because she's got a lot to sell. But this is not manufactured this way. This is manufactured and designed to be burned. So every copy is different, because the fire would have treated the paper differently. I mean, that's just a small example of the kind of vocabulary that this comic is ready to pick up and put in there. A wonderful collection of small short stories, being much more affecting and much more heartrending than I would have thought, and very, as I said, very relatable. The characters and their anxieties, their fears, their half-hearted attempts or misguided solutions is is great fun to go through, but they're also very, very relatable. They're also very recognizable, and that's what I think really gives it its charm. So I think I mentioned once, as I did earlier, also about why do I keep forgetting the name of the Mega Hex comics, Simon Hanselman's comics? And so I said, oh, this is a bit like Simon Hanselman's comics, but it's not anywhere near as profane or as well, I think profane is the word for it, but as like bad behavior as that. But there is a certain charm and a certain weird attraction to characters that you might not have thought would be relatable, but are actually relatable because of the kind of very recognizable fears and anxieties that they have within them. And that's what I think, alongside the humor, alongside the effortless. It's really very easy to read, in spite of it being kind of complicated, and that's where I think that's where the illusion comes in. That illusion of simplicity is that it's so well designed, it's so well drawn and lettered that even things like word balloons that are intersecting or on the opposite ends of where the characters are, you're never confused as to doing. And I've seen much more big deal comics that can't do those things correctly. So there's this skill, just like the other comics that we've talked about before, and just like with the stories from Zoo, there's this skill involved in these comics in the way that the cadence of the story is unmistakable, and you get exactly what the author wants you to go through. You go on that roller coaster ride completely in their control. That's what makes something, whether it's independent or like, that's what makes a great comic a great comic. And that's what I loved about this, because it was so unexpected. And I was like, oh, it's going to be a cute little animals kind of thing, brightly colored. But it was quite different. So it was quite different from what I was expecting. So that was, I think, one of the main reasons why it appealed to me so much. But over and over again, you can just sort of pick it up and go through it. Ashwita says that they're fun and absorbing. Absorbing is a very good word for it. You kind of get lost in it. So this is Shampoo and Daddy by Aditi Mali. Partworks Comics reader says, went to my first con of the year, Inkblot in Nottingham, 25 tables, all indie and small press. Good to catch up with Bourbon Muir and Jade Sarson. Why am I reading this without my glasses? And to pick up work from some folks who were new to me. I do not know Bourbon Muir and Jade Sarson, so everyone's new to me. And there is, I would love to hear from all of you. I mean, I know there are many of you who do read indie and small press and self-published comics, and these are things that I've gotten into over the years, and now I'm discovering more and more within the context of India. And as I said before, it's only the tip of the iceberg right now, but it is a different kind of thing. But at the same time, I'm surprised by how much I find in common between the comics I really like, that are independent and small press and self-published, and the ones that are, big deal, big name, big corporation comics. The ones that I like, they have things in common, and the things they have in common have to do with storytelling, have to do with character, have to do with the effect that they create on the reader. And if you can do it in a way that you've seen it before, you start kind of getting bored. So you're always looking for something new anyway. I think what we're talking about and what I was talking about earlier is how you extend yourself a little bit. You put yourself out of a comfort zone as a reader, and then you get rewarded by things that you wouldn't have found within your comfort zone. It's exactly because you stepped out of that you find it. Now, this is not to say that all of it will be equally appealing, all of it will be equally adept or skilled, or all of it will appeal to everyone. But I just think that what I am really happy to have found over here are these independent comics that, to me, are working and functioning as great comics, as good comics, as entertaining comics, as absorbing comics, because they understand comics, because they understand the medium, and now you can do different things with the medium, and I'm interested in seeing what people want to do with it. So now we've got Just three more left. Aditi was in the chat earlier as well. Wow. Okay. All right. Well, she probably got bored or fell asleep. Um, the Ismail anthropomorphic fantasy series through Avery Hill. Yes, I know that. I've heard about that series. I need to read those books. Okay, next up we have let's go with Little by Little, written and illustrated by Sumesh Kumar. I picked up Little by Little at the New Delhi Comic Con last year, where I got to meet Somesh, and uh, and I talked to him about these stories. And it's not multiple stories. This is actually, unlike a lot of what we have looked at over here, this is not a collection of short stories. This is one long story, and it's only the first two volumes of a long autobiographical graphic novel project. And these are self published by Somesh, but I believe, if I'm remembering now correctly, I believe he does have, or he's close to, a deal or an agreement with a publisher to publish the entire book as either one volume or as subsequent volumes of this, and then as one volume. If I'm remembering correctly, it should be 5 or 6 parts. And each of these, I think the first one, the first volume over here is 98 pages. The second one's a little thinner, so maybe 90 pages. So it'll be 4, 5, 600 pages. I don't know if I'm remembering correctly. But this is going to be a multi-part autobiography when it's finished, and already it has started by the end of volume 2, hinting at or getting to what the story's going to focus on, or one of the things that the thing's going to focus on. So there is a little bit of a blurb back here. Now, I'll be like right off the bat, I'll tell you that I thought these 2 volumes were terrific. There are things, like I was saying before, with everything that I can critique in some way, but the overall ambition, and not just the ambition, but the execution of what this is honestly staggering. It seems fantastic. I don't think I've seen anything like this in Indian comics, but I'm not going to celebrate it for, being the first or being. That's not really the point. The point is, it's that kind of thing that I was talking about. Is when I was reading this, I was impressed, but I was also ecstatic that such a thing exists, because this is a autobiographical story that is about the author's childhood, about family, and about his father's descent into alcoholism. But I only know that because of the blurb, which I think is a little spoilery and shouldn't be there. And also, not spoilery because it spoils the plot or anything like that. It's not really about that. It's about because the discovery of the story and the finding of how the author has decided to unfold the story, which is by taking their time and by giving you this amazing amount of detail, of real lived in detail, set some decades ago. It's a childhood story, but it's also one of the most evocative and one of the most powerful depictions of Indian middle class, and like real middle class, not upper middle class, or almost the 1% masquerading as middle class, but the honest to goodness, and not in a metro, by which we mean one of the 4 big metropolitan cities: Delhi, Calcutta, Bombay, Chennai, or Madras, or even Bangalore, but different locales, but middle class life, and the details of it, the details of the late 80s, the early mid 90s. It's incredible. It's a fantastic work of autobiography. It's beautifully drawn. It's magnificently composed, as a piece of artwork, but also as a remembrance and as an elegy. And the details of the story are filled in slowly. There's no real rush to get somewhere, and that is, I think, what I found to be the most impressive thing in the story. And there's a lot that's impressive over here. In particular, the artwork and the comics design of the page. But when you start reading it, when you start looking at the dialogue, the interactions, the narration, and the way the narration works with the speech bubbles, it's amazing. It's astonishingly good. I think the when I was reading this, I would have to stop every now and then and think about like how this could be different, because I've got that editorial sort of thing in my head. And I mean, as I said, there are things that I can nitpick. I think one of the things that I wasn't sure about was I wasn't sure about the lettering. And the reason I wasn't sure about the lettering is because I felt the story was very powerful, and I thought that I really wanted to, I wanted the lettering to interfere less with what I was looking at. And there was something about the captions. There was something about, but the more I thought about these things, the more I realized that I was trying to find some things to nitpick at, to try to figure out, like how would I tweak this? How would I tweak that? And what was prompting that was this incredible density and texture in this story. I think the first part has it has a couple of time jumps backwards in it, but it moves fairly linearly, and so does the second part. Moves fairly linearly with a couple of things that go backward in time, but it does take this chapterized approach by location. So the author's mother is a teacher and or gets a job in the first or gets a new job in the first chapter and moves. And so you have life up to a certain point of time, including summer holidays and visiting relatives in probably my favorite section of a book that I really loved is the summer holiday section. And then coming back home. But then at the very end of this chapter, they leave and go to a new place. And at the end of the second chapter, she is transferred again and they leave and go to a new place. But the father stays while the mother moves, and the two children move with the mother. But because of their jobs and because of their goals for their goals for their children, for their future, for their education, they have to make these tough choices of living apart in order to earn two salaries. And that's when the drinking problems will start. But they're only hinted at, or they're only not hinted at, they only rise up at the very end of chapter 2. So it's from here, I think, that the alcoholism and the descent will start. But what Somesh has done in these two chapters is create a foundation of family life and existence in India at a particular time, at a particular location, with a certain amount of money. Here they are enjoying eating at a fancy restaurant and talking about how such a fancy restaurant is beyond the imaginings of so many people. And this approach to life and showing of things slowly constricting around them means that the story is about a lot more than just alcoholism, because we've had 200 pages of what could possibly be 500 pages. We've had 200 pages of it, and it has only come up in the last couple of pages of chapter 2. That means that there's other stuff in life. There's other stuff between the parents' marriage and the family and the in-laws and the father's parents, and how the grandparents are and how extended family is, how neighborhoods are, the role of things like caste and class politics, the things about work politics and government jobs and petty jealousies, these are given enough time to sort of bake into the fabric of this world that we are looking at and the world that we are existing in. So when you have a kid going to school and being bullied, not just by maybe other students, but by teachers, it starts feeling like, as I was saying, like an incredible experience of a real lived in existence that we understand has many challenges in it. And so the alcoholism that will arise or has started arising over here is given a lot of context, and it's given not just a reasoning behind it, but it's given this sort of placement. And I can't wait to see where it goes next. I really love the fact that it's coming out in these chapters because it feels a lot looser and a lot more rambling and a lot more anecdotal and memory based than something I think that was all created in one go would have. Although I've obviously got no way of guaranteeing that. I'd be interested in seeing this when it's complete. I wonder if it will be re edited. I wonder if some of these things will be changed in sequence. Right now, as I said, it's a fairly linear story with a couple of flashbacks, but then I had some questions about some of these flashbacks, and I was like, oh, how old was he there, or where does this happen, or is this something that happens all the time, or is this something that happened once? There are certain questions like that that arise for me, but for me, the main thing is I want to see what happens next, because the foundation has been. See, I don't even want to say foundation, because I don't think this works as in like, here is the backdrop and now the real story will begin. After a certain point of time, I think after the first 20 pages or so, I found myself settling into little by little and thinking about it as, but this is the story. This is the story of the family. It's a story of every day and every month and every week, and how these things build and how these things accumulate. And so, therefore, you're not thinking about this as a story about one particular character or one particular incident, at least not yet. You're thinking about it as the story of a family and everything that's around that family. So it feels like I got, because again, because of the blurb maybe, or because of what I thought about, I knew about the book, I got into it thinking that it's going to be something that starts from the very beginning. And it does in many ways. It starts and then the rest of the story is a flashback. So there is a larger frame that's alluded to right at the beginning of the first book. But the pacing of it and the relaxed nature of that story, I thought was just magnificently done. It's, again, it's not like I don't have my critiques. It's like there are many things that I could tweak and think about, as like, if it's going to be this long and sprawling, would I do it this way, would I adjust it that way? Those things will always exist. But the, as I said, the sheer ambition of what is being talked about here is that depiction of life, it's something that I think about the greatest novels or movies or TV shows are the ones that achieve that kind of feeling of the world, of that lived in world, which this comic does. And where so many comics are trying to, they achieve a sort of disconnection. They achieve a sort of fantasy, fairy tale, speculative fiction, sci-fi, whatever it may be. They achieve that sort of power by disconnecting. I think this is a very different type of work, which is more about grounding it and actually sort of sinking your teeth into reality, into the fabric of reality in order to do your storytelling, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. So that's Little by Little by Somesh Kumar. Two chapters in. Can't wait to see what comes next. Sriram says, sounds close to the best we could do. Yeah, I think the best we could do had that immigrant story. And yes, it definitely had those family dynamics in there. I I think obviously because I'm from India and also I am closer in age to the author. I'm older than the author, but it's also a time that I remember, So when there are talks of certain kinds of TVs and certain kind of VCRs and how rare this was, I mean, I might be, I don't know how many generations have passed since then. I don't know how many kids today are flying kites on their rooftops and how many little boys are running to loot the fallen kite. It's like I did that when I was a kid, so I know the word loot. The word loot isn't used over here, but I knew what's going on over there. I knew what looting is. I knew what the kite flying thing was about. And I'm not saying that this will only be appealing to people who've lived that. I'm saying as someone who has lived parts of it and who is familiar with parts of it, I could vouch for the authenticity of the feeling that it was bringing up in me. And so therefore I find that to be a very powerful representation. So yes, in that way, the way that the best we could do, like, gave you a picture of that culture, of those people, of the family dynamics, etc. This does do that, and it does this in a fantastic way. Like if I was thinking about a comic in which you want to you if you want to read a comic about India, of course it's about family, of course it's about these characters and about this dynamic in particular, but it also seems, without trying to be, it seems to be a comic about India because the author has done such a fantastic job of capturing detail and which detail they have focused on and why that detail is there. Some of it just like in the pure novelistic way, you read something and you're just like, this is just detail. And then like 3, 4, 5 pages later, it will come back and you'll be like, it isn't just detail. Everything has a role, everything has a purpose, but that purpose isn't there because it's there in life. It's there because the author has decided to put in there. So it's that level of skill and adroitness that I've really appreciated. And that's why I keep thinking about like, oh, here's the tweak I would make, or here's the slight adjustment I would do, etc., in order to sort of highlight that. And that's why I feel that because it's being written chapter by chapter, and because by the time you're writing chapter 3 or by the time you've written the 4th one, the first one has already been done. I mean, I'm not sure of how the author has, laid it out, or how they've done the roughs, or whether they've worked out the whole thing in one go, or whether it's developed more. It's the kind of thing that you could see people taking years and years or even decades in order to create like this sweeping epic masterpiece. Like it's definitely something I can see being one of those things when it is finished. The scope of it and the detail of it and the passion and the energy of artistic presentation of the story is that good. So I'm looking forward to it because I have a feeling that by the time it's done, it's going to be like one for the ages. So let's see how it goes. Yeah, it is absolutely fantastic, Mithun. If you can find, so little by little, it says little by little dot online. Actually, you know what? Once this live stream is over, I'll put a bunch of links into the description, but also follow me on Instagram because that's where I will tag the people that I can tag and link to them, and do take over, and do follow these creators online as well. Sanit says, little by little. Hi, Sanit. Good to see you. It's very heartfelt. It is heartfelt, but it's also got this. It's also got this sort of clear-eyed view of it. Sometimes I think there is our fear is about sentimentality. Is that, are we going to go so far into our own navel that we, there is this clarity of vision where you've got the nostalgia and you've got the warmth of childhood, but you also have that adult looking back on that childhood having a different view. So it isn't completely into that childhood. There are that there is that little bit of portentousness, there is a little bit of elegy, but it isn't completely, it's not swamped in nostalgia, which is what I would be worried about with things like this, and which is what sometimes I think happens when people write about childhood, when people write about family, is that they might be worried. It's very similar to the kind of thing I'm talking about. It's like, oh, here I am talking about comics, and there might be people out there, they might be watching or maybe watching later or skipping the video to get to the part where I talk about their comics and what am I going to say? What will they think of that? I mean, sometimes I think that affects people when they write, is that they want to be seen as, I'm writing. It's the same kind of thing of nationalism and patriotism, etc. It's the same thing that happens with family. It's the same thing that happens with, autobiography. In some cases, it's the same thing that happens when talking about your hometown. And it's like there is this fear of recrimination if I speak a certain kind of thing honestly and rub somebody the wrong way. So it's necessary that I write about how much sacrifice only, my parents made for me. That this black and white kind of approach never goes into the gray, or doesn't go into the gray too much unless you do this. And I think there's something about this book right at the beginning when you start reading it, and again, because of the blurb, because it's not there in the text, but because what you know about it, right at the beginning when you read something, there is a reaction you have to the modern day author receiving some news, and you're just like, oh, this is going to be like one of those things. And then you read 200 pages of these 2 chapters, and you're like, you have completely subverted my expectations on what I thought this would be about. I thought this would be about an alcoholic, abusive father. And instead, what I'm getting is something very loving, something very devoted, something very troubling, but it's small cracks on a much more appreciable and something that we can empathize with. And that's why I think it's so heartfelt, is because there's a real sadness to it. That's a gray thing. That's not a black and white thing, which is what I liked. Links and tags will be provided, sir. Absolutely, and definitely on the Instagram, and I'll do it in the description over here as well. Aris says the fact that Indian comics are written in English is a great advantage, as they can easily be read through the whole world. Is there some platform to access them outside the country? This is a very good question, and this is a thing that I would want to open up to a lot of people, because I know that when I talk to people, different people have different levels of involvement with an international audience. So there'll be some people like Bhanu, like Anand, who do have a presence outside, maybe because they've got a publisher who has published them and has made their work available. So you can have stories from Zoo published by Bubbles, and you can have Cutting Season published by Fantagraphics, and Mother and Other Stories, as Comic Crack pointed out, published by someone else. And then you also have some people who make their work available through retailers in the United States or in London. I know that copies of Zoo may be available in Gosh. They're available at Quimby's, so they'll be. I wouldn't be surprised. Sleepy reader, there might be a shop in Portland that actually carries stories from Zoo. I mean, not stories from Zoo, which I think it would, but even Zoo might be there. I'll check with Anand on that. Just like, I'll just check with the authors. But with others, yes, English, for example, and this is a good segue into these comics, because both of these comics, Matinee and Pandu, I believe, are not published only in English, but also published in Malayalam. So I'm really appreciative of the fact that they're in English, because if they were only in Malayalam, and I've seen comics that are very interesting that aren't published in English, and of course there are other comics that are not published in English that are not created for an English-speaking audience, as in like they're like there might be grassroots, activistic, informative comics, etc. There might be things about raising awareness and using the comics medium for that, which is also terrific. But it's not the trade publishing, reading kind of stuff that we're talking about. But yes, I think the fact that they're in English already means that that they could be that could be disseminated outside of India more easily, relatively more easily. And I think the digital format would be the way to go about that, because then you'd get rid of all of these logistics issues. Of course, not everyone's a digital reader, and of course, you've got now. Okay, so here's me putting on my publisher and editor hat instead of me doing my YouTuber thing. But it's a fascinating idea. I think there should be some platform, and I'm glad to see I'm glad to see platforms coming up in India that allow me to access these comics. Like, for example, as I was saying, well, again, I'm fortunate enough that people give me comics and send me comics, and that's fantastic. But I was able to order this comic even though I wasn't able to go to ICF Kochi or ICF Bangalore, which is where it was selling. And that's because Comics Canal is an online digital platform that sells comics from certain ICFs and from independent publishers to people across India. Now, can they do international shipping? It's worth asking. In fact, now I can do a little bit of a shameless plug. The Sun is Made of Silver, issue number 1, is a 24-page black and white comic, the one that Nikhil and I are making. But we don't think it's feasible to ship that outside because of shipping costs, etc. But we have gotten that book in a couple of retail bookstores, and those retail bookstores offer international shipping on their books. So they'll ship anywhere. Now, I don't know what the costs will be, but there's Goobies in Bangalore. There's Champaka in Bangalore. There are actually 4 bookstores in Bangalore. And Ashwita, who's in charge of sales and marketing, will have all of the details. But Goobies, Champaka, the Bookworm, and Ata Galata are 4 Bangalore bookstores that are stocking our book. And I think all of them do international shipping or have website sales. Midlands at Aurobindo Marg in New Delhi is a bookstore that is keeping our comic, and they do international shipping. So you could like go to the third party platforms and do that. But I think it would be really interesting if we could put together like a picnic hamper, like a subscription box or something like that, where we say, like, let's get all, like, I'd love to get everyone here, like give one copy, and then someone in the US can order all 6 of them or all 7 of them. And at least that would be a more feasible package. Of course, shipping would still be ridiculous and it would be very expensive, but it wouldn't be you paying $20 for a $10 book or something like that. At least it would be like, okay, if you can get it up to, like, say, okay, I've got $80 worth of comics or $60 worth of comics and $20 shipping or $25 shipping, it's still a stupid proportion, but at least it's a little bit more digestible. So I would love to see something like that, which does the same kind of things that platforms are trying to do right now. I would love to see that happen. So speaking of which, Matinee and Pandu are 2 comics out of Kerala. And as I said, they've been published in English as well as in Malayalam. Matinee is written and illustrated by Kalyani B. And Pandu is an anthology of graphic narratives from Kerala that have a variety. There's 5 stories in here. And there are focus. Oof. There we go. So you've got 5 stories in here, and you've got Sanid, who's in the chat over here, or was in the chat over here, who's the editor of Pandu. And Matinee is a single author creator work. So let's start with this, which to me was it was almost like the pitch was enough for me to pick it up. But then I checked out a couple of pages online and I was instantly hooked. So this tells the story of the author Kalyani B's mother as a college student, 6 friends, girls who live in a hostel, or I think it's a PG, a paying guest sort of hostel establishment while going to college. And these six girls see the poster for an adult film, an erotic film or a porn film in Malayalam, and they see a poster for it and they decide that they want to go and watch it. This is the art style for that, and this is just the simple. Well, I say simple, but nothing is simple. This is the story of these six girls wanting to do that and the problems that they face. And one of the first things is that it's a great art style, but the six characters were instantly separated. I mean, of course, a couple of them play much more central roles, and a couple of them are along for the ride, but they're immediately distinguished from from each other and between each other. Their voices are given instant recognition as separate characters. And once again, it's the details of the lived in world, like right over here, them smoking cigarettes, playing Uno, looking out onto the street from their little hostel room, and the way that they live and the way that they talk and interact with each other, and then the plans they make to go ahead and try to see this movie, and then of course the problems that they face. It's a simple, in some ways, story that is just wonderfully done. It's elegant and it's funny. It definitely makes some points, as you would think that it would. And this may sound, I don't know how this sounds to the varied audience we have over here, but I think that Indian audience members or Indian readers might think about this in a very different way than people in other countries might, or maybe not. Maybe it's the same thing. Maybe you can understand why it's such a weird and complex and strange proposition, for these girls to go to this movie theater, and why they would face the kind of hassles they would, and what the problems, like this here's the projectionist would have with playing the movie now that he knows that there are these six women who are there in the audience, these six girls in the audience, as well as the girls themselves and the way they behave with each other, and whether they're in with this plan or whether they think it's a good plan or not. But of course, their curiosity and their confidence, and they're like, if we want to, we're adults, this is legal, we should be able to do this, we're going to go out and do this. But it doesn't get as, it doesn't get angry, I mean, except for comedically at certain times. And it has this wonderfully funny climax of where people start fighting because the movie won't be shown until the men sort of I mean, I guess it's a bit of a spoiler. And then you've got, the movie plays and everyone watches it, and then you've got this sort of Ocean's 11 type of ending in which they're just like, wow, what a day that was. So it's quite pleasant. I mean, I suppose that there are larger questions about sexuality and desire, etc., that could always be explored. But this story isn't really about that. This story is about that expedition to watch a movie, and why that is or is not something that is allowable, or something that's feasible, or something that's doable. I thought the topic of it immediately, as I said, the pitch of it, like six girls in, what is it, the mid 90s, maybe, maybe a little later. Actually, now that I think about it, yeah, but it's the author's mom. So at this point of time in this area, that's good enough. That's gripping enough for me to say, okay, I want to see this, particularly because it's based on a true life story. And then the way that it's executed, the lightness and the deftness of the touch, and the comedy in it, and the characters in it, made this an absolutely it made an absolutely pleasurable read. I'm very, very happy to see this, and I also think that the author, the writer artist Kalyani B, is, I mean, I'm not sure if she's done other comics. I'm sure she must have done other comics because this is quite adept. This is very confident. The storytelling is very confident. The scene by scene progressions, the details that are focused on the world that is built, as well as the variations in style, the variations in lettering, the variations in narrative, context provision. All of it seems to me to be extremely polished and very confidently done. So it's like one of those things where you see someone's work and you're like, they know what they're doing, and they know what they're doing they're quite adept at what they're doing. So fantastic stuff in Matinee. And finally, we have Pandu, a graphic anthology from stories from Kerala. As I said, there are 5 stories over here. The first one over here, in keeping with a lot of similar sort of themes, particularly we've got Little by Little, we've got Matinee, and then we've got the first story in Pandu, Bishop's Bungalow, which was my personal favorite. But there, like all of the stories over here, all 5 of the stories are great. But I loved this art style. But I loved also this is a it's the memory of a grandmother being narrated and then being made into a comic. So the editor of this volume is the person who took his grandmother's story. So you'll see that the story is by Bina Asif Ali and the script is by Sanid. Sanid is essentially transcribing her story, but he's making it into this comic. And this is a comic about the family moving to a new bungalow because of a job and an assignment, and believing that it is haunted, and the children trying to figure out and find out what is going on in this bungalow. An absolutely charming story for not the mystery or the solution to the mystery, but in the creation of that world, that environment, kind of a forgotten kind of time and place. Because what we're talking about, even with the story of this haunting or this supernatural thing, it's a thing that what is the level of belief? What is the level of proof? Or it's got that fairy tale esque kind of quality, and then moving past that and thinking about that location and how the world changes and how places change. Again, very similar to Little by Little and Matinee. I thought the story really succeeded in evoking life in a place, and why that friction matters, why it's so important to note it. And then as I went on with the anthology, and now this is something that I think we've all talked about at various stages, like most anthologies have an issue with consistency, and that's just the nature of the beast. Is like not everything is going to be the same, and I don't mean of the same quality. They're just not going to be the same, and therefore there's always a chance, even in a collection of short stories by a single author, you might have variation of tremendous nature. So my concern or my worry with anthology is it's always going to be inconsistent. Some things are going to be hit and some things are going to be miss. But anthologies are great for discovering creators and for seeing. And I also understand, and here's me putting on my publisher hat again, I also understand why they're made from the practical point of view. But over here, as I moved on to the other stories, I found that I thought that all of the stories worked really well because each of them was done in not just a different style, by which I mean an art style, but they were concerned with different things while keeping with this idea of a graphic narrative from Kerala. So, one of the things that tied them together is that they're all very much about the place. It's very much about, but on different aspects of it, whether it is about a theatrical dance performance, whether it is about a someone who moves to the Middle East to work a job and pay, to be able to support their family in India, which is a very common phenomenon. And this whole idea of living apart from your family and living in a different place and living with in a life where you may not have as much. This was a very poignant story, Return Ticket, a very short story, maybe one of those in which it was like this could have been a longer story, but it was beautiful, just like this story was beautiful. But they're all different aspects of Kerala. One is this, the first story is this old, forgotten time and land, and this, when my grandmother was a little girl, what happened, and then with this old man who used to be a performer, and then this story of this man who not moved, but who lived abroad, and the each story over here, I think, and here's another, it's just like it's beautifully drawn, it's wonderfully, but there's something about the nature of these stories where they're not trying to be an explosive action comic. They're not trying to be they're obviously not speculative fiction or anything like that, but there is a real there is a real mood to what we are talking about and what these are. And I think that as a giving voice to a place, this is what I found to be quite successful. Even with the final story, which is done in a very obviously manga style, but obviously very intentionally. We've got, the story of the construction of a bridge by someone who's brought in, and the locals' reaction and behavior towards that is like, this is one of those anthologies where I felt like it really did hang together because of, I think, the editorial intent, because of this idea of Kerala, of this state, of this location, but all that it could mean, where it could be, you could traverse not just in time, as these stories do, but also in location, where the return ticket story almost doesn't take place in Kerala at all. It's just about remembering Kerala and revoking Kerala, because that's where your family is and that's where life is. And yeah, this is my reaction to this is, although I may have my favorite story in it or certain things in it that I enjoyed a lot more than the others. I enjoyed all of them, first of all, but also I felt that as an anthology, it was very successful because of how tight it kept its scope, even though the stories in it were so varied. But most of all, I think with something like Pandu, with something like Matinee, with all of these, with Somesh's Little by Little and Shampoo and Daddy and stories from Zoo and Bhanu Pratap stories, is like the thing that I'm filled with most is admiration at the uniqueness and the range of these stories and the voices and the fact that people are out there sort of just doing it. It's not this is why that independent part of it is so important and so impressive. And this is why I'm very excited to have dipped my toes into this area, because this is what's going on. And as I keep saying, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more out there that when people say, well, there isn't really a comics industry and there isn't really and that's true, it doesn't compare to the way it is in the United States, the way it is in Japan or Europe, etc. And it doesn't compare to that sort of level of where generation after generation after comics creators and comics publications and weekly and monthly series have trained people in the craft and in the the structure and the rules and the expectations of the medium. It's not necessarily that. A lot of people, I mean, yes, we've grown up reading comics, but it's been sporadic, it's been, sort of scattered, and it's expensive. So our experience is, it's not it's not quite the same, I think, that it is in many other countries. But the fact that you have people who are able to take that experience and understand the medium's power to be able to tell these kind of stories, it's just it's fascinating to me. And so this is a small sampling of books that I've enjoyed recently and enjoyed discovering, not just them as the stories that they are, which I've enjoyed, but just the fact that they exist and just the fact that these creators exist and have this incredible amount of passion that they put into it and are bringing these books out. It makes me want to discover more of them and talk about them, irrespective of, I might not think that they're perfect, and I appreciate someone saying that I've never used the word perfect, but I still love the fact that they exist. And I will say that, yes, I would like to admire things that are well done and well written. And these are books that I've admired. These are books that when I read them, I was like, these are good books. And I'm so glad that there are people making them. And I'm feeling rather foolish about the fact that I didn't know they existed, or I might even feel foolish about the fact that I'm so surprised that they're so good. It's like, what kind of a condescending attitude did you have? But that's because I don't know. And so therefore, when people say that, oh, I didn't know about that, or I had never heard about Usagi Yojimbo and stuff like that, I'm like, yeah, everyone's got different levels of what they know and what they're exposed to. I'm just happy that I've found these, and I'm looking forward to finding many more, and I'm looking forward to being involved with these comics creators, other comics creators, and making comics and publishing comics in India, because this stuff makes me happy. It makes me excited, and it makes me feel as if there's a verge. I'm never going to think that comics are going to take over and be the dominant medium. No, it's always going to be niche. I understand that, but I do think that I can see, or I hope that I can see, this sort of sea change coming with more and more such works. So I would just like, first of all, I would tell any of these creators and others, it's just fantastic job. Keep doing it. Keep going with it. And I look forward to more. So that's what I got. I really appreciate everyone over here hanging out for this. We've got a bunch of these creators, a couple of them in the chat over here. You can see Saned Asif Ali, who's the writer, and also the head of Studio Niet, which is a publishing company, a press that I've talked about before. A couple of years ago, I made a video on a mail time video in which I got mail from all over the place, and I talked over there about Hope On, the anthology, the pandemic anthology that was created about stories about women and resilience, and that was also from this comics publisher. So I've known about them and their work for a while, but a lot of others are discoveries and new books from people that I've known for a while. Floyd McLovin says Anand Pagalkutta is a revelation. I'm asking you to review him a couple of videos back. He is highbrow and pulpy at the same time, accessible, neat, and satisfying. Well said. Yes, absolutely. Anand's stories, I do think, are accessible. I don't think they're, that avant-garde. I think they're very funny, and I also think they're very touching. It's the same way that I feel about a number of these things, is that accessibility really isn't the problem. It's more about our own mindset. If I want my comics to look a certain way, if I want them to be lettered a certain way, if I can only take that and nothing else, then I'm sort of interfering with myself, discovering things, and you let them do that, and then they can be revelations, right? That's what we like. We like things revealing themselves to us. So yes, and I would love to know what you all think about this. I know that my viewership is a small but passionate one, and I really would love to talk more about independent comics. I would love to talk more about small presses and independent publishing, but I'd also like to talk about creating comics and the craft of it. I'll be doing a lot of behind the scenes and closer looks and all that stuff for YouTube members and patrons and all that stuff, but also as part of the regular channel. I've had some suggestions on people saying, you should interview people and talk to people and all that stuff. If that's something that people are interested in, I would love to do that. So maybe that's what's coming up next for the love of comics. So this is For the Love of Comics. Thanks so much, everyone, for watching. This was a great, fun live stream for me to do because it's been, as I said, something that I've been wanting to get to for a while, but my inability to make a coherent sort of edited video out of this finally resulted in me rambling non-stop for this long. But I hope all of you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. This is going to be me signing off at this point of time, but I'll be back very soon. So I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.